All right, back to King George. What was his problem? So we last left off with some tea party. Not the kind that we would have enjoyed, though. Remember how at tea party they threw all the tea in the water because they were mad at Britain? So what happens next? Step 10, pay the fiddler. A British naval commander named Admiral Montagu watched the Boston Tea Party from the window of his waterfront house. As the disguised Sons of Liberty marched away from the wharf, Montagu opened his window and exchanged shouts with one of the men. Montagu: "Well, boys, you've had a fine, pleasant evening for your Indian caper, haven't you? But mind you, you've got to pay the fiddler yet. Sons of Liberty, just come on out here, if you please, and we'll settle the bill in 2 minutes." Montagu shut his window. The men cheered and laughed. Montagu was right, though. The people of Boston would have to pay the fiddler. In other words, they would have to face the consequences of their actions. One consequence was that King George threw an absolute fit. He called the Tea Party violent and outrageous, and he wasn't alone. Even members of Parliament, who usually supported the Americans, were furious about the destruction of British tea. A member of Parliament named Charles Van captured the angry mood in London, declaring, "The town of Boston ought to be boxed about their ears and destroyed. I am of the opinion you will never meet with that proper obedience to the laws of this country until you have destroyed that nest of locusts." Now that's the kind of advice King George liked. At the king's request, Parliament passed a series of laws designed to teach the people of Boston, once and for all, that British authority must be obeyed. No fooling around now. Parliament ordered the port of Boston shut down until the town paid for the ruined tea. The people of Massachusetts would no longer be allowed to elect their judges or sheriffs, and if the residents of Boston wanted to hold a town meeting, they would need permission from British officials. To enforce all this, General Thomas Gage was sent back to Boston, this time with 4,000 British soldiers. And that should solve everything, right? Step 11, stand firm. A few months later, Samuel Adams was eating dinner with his wife and kids, and one of Boston's best tailors knocked on the door. The tailor came in and measured Sam's rather round body. He said he had been asked to make Adams a new suit. He refused to say who had paid for this service. Then a hatter arrived. He measured Adams' head for a new hat. He wouldn't say who had sent him. Then a shoemaker came to measure Adams' feet. What was going on? Well, a lot. As planned, the British soldiers had closed the port of Boston. This was a kick in the gut to the Boston economy, which was built on shipping and trade. Stores shut, jobs disappeared, colonists called the harsh British punishments the intolerable acts. Even people who avoided politics took sides in the crisis. You were a patriot if you opposed British taxes and stood by Boston. You were a loyalist if you supported the king. Patriots all over the colonies sent supplies to Boston: beef, fish, flour, rice, cash. Patriot leaders also agreed to hold a meeting in Philadelphia. They could all get to know each other, maybe figure out what to do about the intolerable acts. That explains the tailor, hatter, and shoemaker. Of course, Sam Adams would be making the trip to Philadelphia for the Continental Congress. But for such an important meeting, he really needed some new clothes. He was an embarrassingly sloppy dresser. So his friends hired the tailor and the others, and Sam Adams set off for Congress in a fancy new suit with gold buttons on the sleeves and silver buckles on his shoes. Next to him in the carriage sat his cousin, John Adams, well-known, lawyer, patriot, and grump. A few hundred miles south of Virginia, George Washington was also getting ready for the Congress. Washington was one of the few patriot leaders with military experience in the French and Indian War. He had recently made news with a bold promise: "Need be, I will raise 1,000 men, subsist them at my own expense, and march myself at their head for the relief of Boston." Patrick Henry and Edmund Pendleton, two more Virginia patriots, stopped by Washington's place, and they all set out together for Philadelphia. As they rode off, a voice called out to them, "I hope you will all stand firm. I know George will." That was Martha Washington, George's wife, and while she urged courage, she also worried where the conflict might lead, saying, "I foresee consequences, dark days ahead." Step 12, make speeches. The Continental Congress began in Philadelphia in early September 1774. There were a total of 56 delegates from 12 colonies. Georgia stayed home. 56 men meant 56 different opinions and some very long debates. John Adams complained that if someone had declared that 3 + 2 equaled 5, members would have wasted a couple of days debating the issue. So it took a while, but the members of Congress came to some serious decisions. They declared the Intolerable Acts to be an illegal violation of the rights of American colonists. They decided it was time to start boycotting trade with Britain again. and they agreed that the colonies should start arming and training their militias, volunteer armies, just in case there was trouble with the British soldiers in Boston. Before the Congress ended, Patrick Henry did two things that he was famous for. One, he annoyed everyone by talking too much, and two, he made a fabulous speech. A few fabulous speeches. The distinction between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englands are no more, he cried. I am not a Virginian, but an American. This kind of unity really surprised British leaders. They'd been sure that the other colonies would stand aside and let Massachusetts suffer alone. They were wrong. All right, the last step. Step 13. Let blows decide. Now the stage was set for a showdown. Neither side really wanted war, but neither side was willing to back down. As usual, King George thought a show of force would improve matters. He declared, "The New England colonies are in a state of rebellion. Blows must decide whether they are to be subject to this country or independent." Blows, you say? Speaking in a church in Virginia, Patrick Henry did his thing. "Gentlemen may cry, 'Peace, peace,' but there is no peace. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Back in Boston, all this tough talk was making General Gage extremely nervous. Unlike Patrick Henry and King George, Gage was going to have to do the actual fighting. He wrote to London asking for more soldiers. "If you think 10,000 men sufficient, send 20, Gage wrote, and this takes us up to April 1775, right where we want to be.